Welcome to our next segment of the virtual tour. In this portion, we are going to be discussing the 1932 White Store burglary. By the time the sun came up that morning, one business was ransacked, one man was shot dead, another was in custody, and a third was on the run. This is the tale of the White Store burglary, 1932. The story begins really in Milwaukee that year when two brothers, George and Anton Jacoby, and their brother-in-law, Frank Pulaski, found themselves on hard times and decided to head north to commit nighttime burglaries in communities in northeast Wisconsin. They were suspected of previous burglaries around Francis Creek near Manitowoc and in Denmark outside Green Bay. Weeks prior to the December incident, the men were suspected of a previous break-in at the White Store, taking $500 in merchandise during that haul. All three men were in their mid-20s. Why they chose Pulaski is unknown. Perhaps they had relatives here, as they appear to have come from Milwaukee's Polish-American community. Pulaski was an unemployed steel mill worker, a press operator who lost his job earlier that year in March. With Christmas approaching and no honest prospects in play, the three men took Pulaski's father's car and headed to Pulaski the night of December 4th to raid the White Store once again. The Prokopovich family established itself early in the community, and their business interests started with the White Elevator, a granary, and the first White Store, a mercantile, in 1908 and 1911 respectively. They were operated by Malin Prokopovich Sr. and his brother Louis. A third brother, Julius, started a furniture store and a funeral parlor in 1909 on the current site of our very museum. The first White Store was a simple wooden frame building from the earliest days of Pulaski, and it sat on the corner of Brad's service station. Business flourished under the careful and wise guidance of the Prokopovich brothers, and eventually they needed to expand their mercantile. In 1915, they built the second White Store, a massive building that stretched nearly an entire city block. It included a grocery warehouse, but was known for offering many finer goods such as jewelry, watches, clocks, silk gowns, expensive suits, and hats, even furniture and ceramics. Large glass windows face east towards St. Augustine Street, advertising and displaying all the beautiful goods Malin Prokopovich offered Pulaski's growing needs. Most of the building still stands, located directly across from Ensight Teleservices, absent the large street-side windows. Such a building with its fine wares and low security was a nice target for would-be burglars. Late that evening, on December 4th, Frank Pulaski and Anton Jacoby pried their way into the White Store through the back alley. Meanwhile, George Jacoby acted as a getaway driver, circling around town while the other two collected expensive goods and stacked them near the back entrance to the store. Things might have gone off without a hitch if not for the village's marshal, Al Kubiak. Anton Al Kubiak was one of Pulaski's native sons, his father being Anton Kubiak Sr., the prominent lumberman from early Pulaski. As village marshal, it was Al Kubiak's responsibility to protect the town, even though he wasn't issued a firearm. The village couldn't afford it. Before becoming village marshal, Al Kubiak was a prize fighter, a heavyweight boxer who had made his name fighting in numerous venues across Wisconsin and the Midwest. Kubiak was even the sparring partner of the great heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey. The two men reunited in 1956 in New York. Kubiak was a tall, imposing man, known for his right crosses and accuracy in the ring. He was a crowd favorite when he fought in Milwaukee in the 1920s. But on the night of December 4th, Marshal Kubiak got a report of a suspicious green Hudson sedan driving around town late that night, the same vehicle that was spotted weeks earlier on the night that the first White Store burglary occurred. It was only a matter of time before Marshal Kubiak would come across the vehicle. Shortly after midnight on December 5th, Marshal Kubiak spotted the sedan and pulled the vehicle over, with George Jacoby behind the wheel. When asked where he was headed, George replied, "Going to see my girl." Marshal Kubiak then asked George, "What's her name?" Fumbling in his story, George replied he didn't know her name. Walking to the back of the vehicle, Marshal Kubiak noticed that a handkerchief had been tied over the license plate, an obvious attempt to make the vehicle untraceable. Marshal Kubiak then ordered George Jacoby to follow him back to the jail, where he was taken into custody. Believing that something was still afoot, before leaving the jail, Marshal Kubiak deputized Mike Blahoviak, and the two headed to the White Store. Blahoviak borrowed a pistol, meaning he was the only one armed of the pair. This was still pre-dawn, early morning on December 5th. As the two men approached the front of the store, they spotted Frank Pelebecki emerging from the alleyway leading to the back of the store. Marshal Kubiak stopped Pelebecki and asked him where he was going so early in the morning. "Going to my cousin's," was his reply. Marshal Kubiak followed up asking, "Who's your cousin?" And like George Jacoby, Frank Pelebecki's story fell apart in front of the marshal. At that point, Marshal Kubiak grabbed Pelebecki by the left arm and told him that he needed to come with them. After a couple short steps towards the jail, and with Kubiak firmly grasping Pelebecki by the arm, the burglar reached into his right pocket and pulled out a .38 caliber pistol, aiming it at Blahoviak. Agile as he was in the ring, Marshal Kubiak grabbed the shooter's right arm at the wrist, but not before Pelebecki got two shots off at Blahoviak, both missing at close range. As Marshal Kubiak wrestled with Pelebecki, again, he didn't have a gun of his own, he shouted out to Blahoviak to return fire, knowing full well that he could be hit in the exchange. The deputy opened fire into the melee, his bullet striking Pelebecki in the chest and exiting out under his right arm. Startled, Pelebecki began shouting for the getaway driver, "George, George!" not knowing his partner was locked away safely in the village jail. At that moment, with the exchange of gunfire, on a dimly lit pre-dawn morning, Marshal Kubiak and Deputy Blahoviak stopped and waited for anyone to come rushing out of the shadows to join the fray. Unknown to all of them, Pelebecki's second accomplice, Anton Jacoby, was hiding and drunk. The tension must have been overwhelming for the lawmen, not knowing how many armed gunmen could have been out there. Again, the White Store was massive with lots of hiding places. It was in this moment that, surprisingly, Frank Pelebecki, while mortally wounded, got up and started running. He ran for 3 blocks before finally collapsing from his gunshot wound. Marshal Kubiak and Deputy Blahoviak did all they could to save him, placing him in a car and racing to the hospital in Green Bay. Pelebecki died at the hospital, calling out for his 3-year-old son. While all this was happening, Anton Jacoby fled the scene unnoticed and would have gotten away with his role in the crime if he hadn't dropped his driver's license in the getaway car, that green Hudson sedan driven by his brother George. That and his brother George ratted him out in his confession. Back at the White Store, Milan Prokopovich was surveying the damage and the stack of looted goods at the back door leading to the alley. He noticed that the men knew their high-priced items, taking expensive jewelry, 30 silk dresses, fine shoes, sports coats, overcoats, tobacco, groceries, even light bulbs. At the very bottom of the pile lay 3 little pairs of boys' shoes, presumably gifts for Pelebecki's son. The silk dresses were for his wife, now widowed. Justice was very swift for the surviving burglars. Anton Jacoby was quietly taken into custody days after in Milwaukee. For a time he was under armed guard at one of the city's hospitals, suffering from the gripe. On December 10th, less than a week after the burglary, George Jacoby was sentenced to 1 to 5 years in Waupun State Prison. 2 days later, on December 12th, Anton Jacoby was sentenced to a like term of 1 to 5 years at Waupun State Prison. Anton pleaded leniency because he claims he was drunk during the whole affair. In another surprising twist, Al Kubiak resigned as village marshal on December 13th, a day after the convictions. Kubiak cited that he shouldn't have had to rely only on the fist that brought him fame in the ring. The village should have provided him a pistol. For a time he carried a borrowed gun, but this was taken back by its rightful owner, leaving Kubiak without a sidearm. What finally broke Kubiak, though, was the village docking him $17 pay, money they say Kubiak owed the father of a 15-year-old who Kubiak had arrested earlier in 1932 for a dance hall fight. The father claimed his son was injured during the arrest, and Kubiak said the teen was injured in the fight. Kubiak refused to pay the boy's father, a local soft drink parlor operator, so the village took it directly out of Kubiak's pay without his consent. After his resignation, Al Kubiak went back into boxing in 1933, this time as a Golden Gloves trainer, mentoring promising prize fighters from Pulaski and Krakow. And that's the story of the 1932 White Store burglary.